Hi, and welcome. In this video, I want to take a break from the paper writing, and I would like us to return to Parable of the Sower. Up to this point, we've been pretty general about Parable of the Sower. We've talked about chapters 1 through 3 in a discussion. We've talked about chapters 4 through 6 in kind of an overview way, me telling you the things that I want you to notice. For chapters 7 through 9, I wanted to show you my notes, and they relate to what we're doing in the class right now because what I actually end up doing while I'm reading is reverse outlining. Now, what is reverse outlining? Reverse outlining is a lot like outlining, right? When you outline, you develop the ideas that you're going to hit in a paper. Um, Reverse outlining is taking a text, like an essay or a video, and creating the outline that it uses to see how it's working, to see the flow of the piece. Now, this is something I used to have my students do for every paper because it's really good to see how an essay builds its ideas. But I don't have the students do that in this 8-week course because there just isn't time. But I'd like to show you my notes for chapters 7 through 9, Parable of the Sower. So let's take a look. They're not super organized, and I will say this is definitely an informal outline, but it is a good chance to see what my thought process is. Maybe it can help you in your reading. And let's not waste any more time because I'm trying to make this video short. Let me share screen. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So, oh, oops, sorry. Okay, so making it really big for you. So, chapter 7, Lauren's talking about the destiny of Earthseed. In chapter 7, she's kind of just free flow writing about what writing feels like, um, her discovery, the nature of truth, how simple it is, and how broadly she can apply it. She distinguishes between religion based on magic and prophecy, ideology based on observation. It feels like she's wondering whether or not she's developing a Bible, right? Is she developing like a Christian Bible as we know it? She talks about how naming something gives it purpose, and she comes up with the name for this ideology that she's developing. Plants seed themselves far from their parents, right? Because she's continuously distinguishing what she wants to do from what her parents want to do. Um, she talks about making excuse the numbers, those are page numbers, which only makes sense for my copy of the book. Making this up versus discovery, right? So what is she talking about when she says, am I making this up, or am I discovering it? Right? Someone who is, receiving prophecies from an angel, right? Someone might say they're making that up, right? Or they're saying they're getting it from the voice of God. Whereas her version of ideology comes directly from her observations, right? Which makes this a distinctly scientific religion, which is super interesting. Um, so she talks a little bit with her dad. If uh, she finally, after their kind of scuffle about whether or not she should scare people or teach them, she asks her dad, where would you go if the wall came down? And he says, we'd pack up our stuff and we'd go to the university. There's facilities there. And for her, this is, and he also says, and then we'd keep working and we'd keep our income going, and we'd find another way to keep surviving. And for her, this isn't enough, right? For her, this is short-sighted because it's not just the wall coming down that would be a problem. It is the entire system that needs to be rethought and moved away from, right? So again, she returns to this idea that a tree cannot grow in its parent's shadow. She talks about the other planets. She talks about easier versus easy. This idea of easier versus easy is thinking about her dad's way of life. her dad says, well, where would you want to go? And she says, north. I don't really know. And he says, well, that's not clear. That's not a plan. And to her, unclear does not mean undoable, right? She said, just because I don't know now doesn't mean I can't figure it out along the way. And she arrives at her idea, right? Her idea that the destiny of Earthseed, right, the people who think like her, is to take root amongst the stars, right? She knows that a religion needs to have a goal. And for some religions, that's heaven, right? But for her, it's space, right? But also, she knows that that's a symbol, right? It doesn't have to be space. It can also mean be metaphorically taken. Well, we're going to shoot for the stars, right? We're going to do the best that we can, the most that we can. Again, her ideology is rooted in science. It's rooted in what's possible, right? And the metaphor of landing amongst the stars, right? It means we're aiming for things that we can do rather than something abstract like heaven. Um, so now things get a little tough. Tracy Dunn, whose daughter got shot through a fence, she disappears one day, probably because out of guilt. She has Dianca Montoya, who has gotten pregnant, and it's forcing Lauren to reflect on what options she has, right? So many people of her generation in the neighborhood are just getting pregnant, moving into their parents' garages, and starting a family, right? And resources are getting smaller and smaller and smaller as people get more and more and more. There's not enough jobs to go around. Um, and so it's forcing Lauren to be like, okay, well, if I didn't go north, what would I do? Where would I go? What are my options? Right. She looks at Aura Moss, who is one of Richard Moss's wives. Richard Moss is a polygamist, and he has several wives that he treats somewhat like servants. And she talks about, well, why should I go shooting? They came across a corpse that kind of really left everybody shaken. And she thinks, why should I go shooting? It's the men's job to protect us anyways, right? So some people say, my option is to get pregnant. Another person says, my option is to let the men take care of me. And then we have Mr. Payne of the Payne and Parrish household, who emphasizes that everyone running around teaching their children how to shoot is just a form of vigilantism, right? That they're like private armies, but our taxes should be taking care of us because we pay for the police, right? So there's something about whether or not to take power into our own hands, right? Lauren really wants to take power into her own hands, and Lauren's father is like, no, we all work together and we do what's possible and safe and accessible. Whereas Lauren keeps thinking, no, we need to take the power into our own hands. And she's surrounded by people like Aura Moss and Richard Payne, who believe that the power should be in someone else's hands, right? That we're just small people that can't make meaningful change. And we'll see where that gets them. And then there's Keith, right? So now begins the Keith saga. Keith, who has been desperate to learn how to shoot. Keith, who has been desperate to participate after there's robbers keep breaking into the community. He really wants to take up arms. He's a 13-year-old boy. He's not old enough to shoot yet. But he steals the key to the neighborhood. He leaves and he comes back having been beaten. The key is stolen from him, putting the entire community in danger. So so then Keith continues to go back and forth. He leaves once again, even after they give him a BB gun. He leaves. Again, he's trying to take power into his own hands, right? He keeps going back out. When he comes back, he this time he comes back with nice clothes. He steals his stepmother's gun. This happens a few times, right? um and one time he comes back looking really nice, meaning he's kind of figured how things look on the outside. uh, Keith's taking power into his own hands. He's figuring out what he wants to do and how he wants to survive in this world, right? One of our repeating themes of the novel, how to survive in the world. Um, his leaving and coming back causes a rift in the whole family. The Reverend beats Keith's butt one of the times that he comes back. It causes a fight between Corey and the Reverend, right? Why aren't you going out and looking for him? If it was Lauren, you would, right? It causes a rift between Lauren and Corey because Corey uh, tells the Reverend that he's playing favorites. Um, and Keith leaves a final time and takes his mother's gun and comes back to give his mom money. And he's like, I'm going to keep bringing you back money. I've figured things out there. Right. So over the course of like a week or a couple weeks, Keith keeps trying his luck, right? He falls off that horse and he gets right back on and wants to see if he can make it out in the real world. And by his final return, he can, right? And he's sneaking around and doesn't want to see his father. So I'm trying to keep this video short. So let's talk about some of the major themes. Some of the major themes of these 3 chapters: options, right? Her options are pregnancy or marriage, working for wealthier families. That's some of the things that the kids are doing. Breaking out into the world like Keith is doing. Learning how to shoot, accruing knowledge. All of these come with some level of sacrifice. So in a world where everything is falling apart, where resources are few, jobs are few, what are our options? These are options. And does this overlap with the real world? Very much so, right? Pregnancy and marriage is an option when a lot of people think about growing up. Working for the rich is another way out of poverty. Um, Another theme of these chapters: power struggle. There's power struggle between Keith and Dad. There's power struggle between Corey and Lauren. Lauren versus Dad, who's trying to who's trying to assert her beliefs about the world. I'm trying to find that opening passage that's about power struggle. Here we go. All struggles are essentially power struggles. Who will rule? Who will lead? Who will define, refine, confine, design? Who will dominate? All struggles are essentially power struggles, and most are no more intellectual than 2 rams knocking their heads together. So in this book about survival, in this book about community, one of the things that comes up is power struggle, right? That there's always going to be struggles for power over the right way to live, over the way to manage their children, over which path to take going forward. Rosalie Parrish decides that she wants to let her children go to shooting practice because things are getting worse and worse. But Richard Payne doesn't want that. Because he believes that the police should be able to take care of them. The big bad world versus little Keith, right? That's another power struggle. 13-year-old Keith going out into the world and saying, I'm going to take this place and make it my own. I'm going to carve out my place here. And you know what? He does, right? He figures it out. As misguided as Keith seems to be, you can't help but root for the kid, right? He wants something and he's going to make it happen. And then finally, the outside world versus the people of the community, right? The outside world seems to be slowly creeping in. A bullet came through the wall. More and more robbers are coming all the time. When people stray out into the outside world, they don't seem to come back, whether that's Tracy Dunn, who went to go take her own life, or Keith, who has gone to join what seems to be the community of criminals in Los Angeles. And finally, the theme of what is your responsibility to the family? Keith endangering the family and the community and then being forced to make a confession at church. Corey favoring Keith and spiting Lauren. Does Corey have a responsibility to Lauren as well as Keith, even though Keith is her son and Lauren is only her stepdaughter? Tracy Dunn, who leaves out of guilt from her daughter having been shot through a hole in the wall. She did not take responsibility for her daughter. And then finally, the battle between Keith and Reverend Olamina affecting the whole family, right? Is their squabble doing disservice to the family? And then Richard Payne deciding what is best, or Rosalie Payne deciding what's best for her kids, which is not what Parrish believes, but she has a responsibility to her family, right? So she sends her kids out to shoot in response to him. So this is me reverse outlining, kind of remixing some of the notes. These videos always go on twice as long as I want them to, and I'm sorry about that. But there's just so much to cover, and I'm not even covering, I'm just scratching the surface. So here's some ways to think about these chapters. Next week is our midterm, so I encourage you to keep up on the reading and start making some notes like I have done. They don't have to look like mine. I'm very familiar with this text, and you are familiar with it in a different way. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you, and I will see you next time.